a little bit about something that happened to me yesterday. Had a bit of a nightmare situation yesterday, actually, because we ran a bit low on food in the house. Don't know if any of you ever get to that point where, you know, you wait until the cupboards are empty and then you're like, oh, we have to go shopping. So I really needed to get some groceries. So I eventually managed to find a bank that was open on a Saturday morning. And I must have queued for at least half an hour. You know what it's like when the person in the queue at the bank is just like, they have decided to wait for this moment to do the most complicated transaction that you could possibly imagine. And so you're there and you're just like waiting and you're trying to be patient because you're a Christian, you're supposed to be patient. But you know, you can feel that kind of stress and that tension rising inside. And then finally they're finished and they go to leave and it's like a thought goes through their mind and they turn back to the counter and then they start talking about something else. So eventually I get to the counter. And I asked them, and you would not believe it, they were completely out of bread, milk, and eggs. I said to the woman, I said to the cashier, I said, this is not acceptable. I have been queuing for half an hour in this bank. This is like a national high street bank, and they've got no groceries. So I'm like, this is totally unacceptable. I'm gonna have to take this up with head office. Now, obviously, none of this actually happened. But I'm hoping to make, you know, like my daughter's looking at me thinking, I don't think you went out yesterday morning. It's totally fabricated, okay? But I'm hoping I might be able to make a little bit of a point this morning. Hopefully at some point while I was telling that story, you may have thought, why did he go to the bank to get groceries? That's not what a bank is for. But I'd like us to think together this morning about what a church is for, and whether we turn up at church with the right kind of expectations about what we might receive. Because otherwise, we're going to get a whole load of complaints for things that actually we were never supposed to deliver in the first place. So I'm going to ask us the question this morning, what do you look for in a church? What do you look for in a church? And just to kind of get us thinking, I found an advert for what could be the perfect church. Take a look at this video.
Imagine a church where every member is passionately, wholeheartedly, and recklessly calling the shots.
I have a busy work week, and by the time Sunday rolls around, I'm tired. So how about a church service that starts when I get there?
Can do. When you arrive, we begin.
This guy, he plays by his own rules. We want to find a church where if he starts screaming, we're not the bad guys, right? Come here.
Say no more. If your baby's screaming, you stay seated. The others around you can leave.
You know, financially, Sherry and I don't give a lot to the church, but we'd sure like to know who does.
All right, if you join now, you'll know what every person gives in detail.
When I'm in the church service, can my car get a buff and a wax?
Not just that, but an oil change and a tune-up.
Hey, how about tickets to the Super Bowl?
That's asking too much.
I'm serious. If I'm going to join, I want tickets to the big game.
All right, you join now and we'll get you there.
I like a pony.
Look in your backyard. Me Church, where it's all about you.
Well, if any of you are thinking, where do I find that church? You maybe slightly missed the point. Obviously, we know, don't we, that church isn't supposed to be like that. I don't suppose there are many of us here today who really think along the lines of the extremes that we saw there, at least. Please, Lord, let there not be that many of us. But sometimes, if we're really honest, it can be hard not to let just the beginnings of that kind of thinking slip into our kind of thinking, the way that we approach church. our thinking can become so conditioned by our experience, what we expect church to provide for us. But it's good sometimes to take a step back and take a bit of an honest look at ourselves. Who's up for being challenged today? So not many of you are going to enjoy this message. What's church really supposed to do for us? You know, I'm actually not entirely sure that I agree with the premise of that video, although I do think it's very funny, and have done for the last 18 years. I found it 18 years ago. I've just been waiting for the moment to show it to you. I think, in a sense, church really is all about us. I just think it's supposed to do something different for us than the things we sometimes imagine. If we look at the word the Bible uses for church, it's a Greek word, ekklesia. Yanni and Harris will tell you how it's really pronounced. But that word, it literally is made up of two parts, and it means a calling out of. And when we look at the way that word was used, because it wasn't a new word that was invented to describe a new thing called the church, it was an existing word. So the writers in the New Testament had to come up with a word. When Jesus talked about his people, he picked a word to use to refer to his people. And that word, as I say, literally means a calling out of. And it was always used to refer to a people. Sometimes we translate it as assembly, people who have come together. And the implication, when we look at how that word was used in the Greek language, it's a people who have come together for a purpose. It's a people who have been called together for a purpose, that there is something to do, that there is something to be accomplished. And so people have been called together by God in order to accomplish this purpose. Now, Jesus uses that word ecclesia on just a couple of occasions in the Gospels. So we want, and some of you have heard me teach on this before, we would want to pay attention if he only talks about this thing that's become so dominant in our Christian lives, our experience of church. If he only talks about the church a couple of times in terms of using that word, then probably it's significant, isn't it, to look at what he said. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 16, first of all. Matthew 16, verses 18 to 20. Jesus says this he's replying to Peter, who's just had a revelation that Jesus is the Son of God. And he says, Jesus says to Peter, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my ecclesia, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he gave his disciples the instruction not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So Jesus says, I'm going to build my church on this revelation that you've had, Peter, and whatever you bind on earth, when we look at the language there, what he's saying is, what you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven. So you will bind on earth the things that are bound in heaven. And what you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. So you'll bind on earth the things that are bound in heaven. You will loose on earth the things that are loosed in heaven. Now we might think, okay, well, that's not kind of language we use all the time, but sounds important. But, you know, that was Peter. And we might think, well, yeah, okay, fair enough, but we move on. The interesting thing is there's only one other time that Jesus talks about the church, and that's a couple of chapters later in Matthew 18. And the context is really different, because this time he's not talking specifically to Peter. He's talking to the church about how to handle it when they fell out with someone. Now, I know none of you have ever fallen out with anyone, but there are some practical instructions just on the off chance that might ever happen in the Bible about how to deal with it when you fall out with someone. And so it says this in Matthew 18, and verse 15. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. So Jesus uses this word ecclesia again, my called out people, the people I've called together for my purpose. And it's like when he talks about that ecclesia, his people that he's called together, straight away we find him saying the same thing. Only 2 occasions, both times, he says the same thing. You're going to be loosing on earth what is loosed in heaven. You're going to be binding on earth what is bound in heaven. You're going to be making earth more like heaven, okay? Which shouldn't come as a massive surprise when the prayer that Jesus taught us how to pray was that his kingdom would come and his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. So God, Jesus, has called us into his plan and purpose that the earth should look more like heaven. And the language we often use to talk about that is that his kingdom would come. That the rule of God, the goodness, the justice, the righteousness, the mercy, the compassion, the fairness, the equity, the loving kindness that is God's rule and reign would be experienced, that people would be able to live in that and experience that in this world and be part of it forever. Because God's desire is that that kingdom should last forever. That we would be able to live in a perfect, wonderful relationship with him, enjoying his goodness, his love, his mercy, and his justice. The church is the community of God's people through which he wants to manifest his presence in the earth. He says, when 2 or 3 of you gather together in my name, there I am in the midst of you. I want you to embody my presence in the earth. That's how my kingdom, that's how my goodness, that's how my love, that's how my mercy is going to come and fill the earth. I want you, as my people, to carry that into the world. And so when you come together as a church, when you function together as a church, when you live together as a community of God's people, I want you to bring something of heaven into this world so that people can experience the truth of this gospel, the reality of this good news that God's kingdom is coming into our world and that we can be a part of it. So in Revelation chapter 21, right at the end of the Bible, verses 1 to 7, we read this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. Now we know from the rest of what the Bible teaches that this is a picture of the church. When we talk about the New Jerusalem, when we talk about the bride of Christ, we're talking about the church. So this is a picture of when the church has finally become all that she is supposed to be. Well, what happens in that moment? It says in verse 3, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, I'm making everything new. And then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. And those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. You know, it's an incredible plan and purpose that God has for our world, and it's an incredible plan and purpose that God has invited every single one of us to be a part of. Church is that community of people that should help you to think about how you embody that good news of that kingdom that we've just read about, that wonderful end times reality when all the tears are wiped away from every eye and everything is finally made new and God's order is perfectly established. That hope, we're supposed to be, if you like, an outpost of that reality. Like where you can experience a bit of a taste of what is to come, so that you can become excited, so that your friends and your family and your neighbors and the people that you meet in your everyday life, so that they can come amongst the church community and get a little bit of a snapshot, a little bit of a foretaste of that reality that we're telling them is coming. So the idea is that we say something better is available that you can be a part of. There's this wonderful kingdom that you can be a part of forever, and we want to put that on display for you. We want you to be able to see that. We want you to be able to encounter that. So church should be helping you to think about how you can embody that good news of God's kingdom in your family and in your workplace and in the street where you live. The way we love one another and care for each other is massive. It's a massively important part of that, because that's part of our good news to the world. Jesus said, didn't he, John 13:35, this is how the world will know that you're my disciples, by the way that you love one another. So the way we love and care for one another is so important. But we're mistaken if we think the main purpose of church is so that other people can love me, so that other people can provide for my needs, so that other people can take care of me. We want to take care of you, don't hear me wrong. We want to love you. It's part of being the people of God. But we're mistaken if we think that the church is a good church if they do a great job of making me feel comfortable or providing for my needs. Now, we associate pastors with providing for our needs, don't we? The word means shepherds. Shepherds are supposed to lead us to good pasture, where we can feed on good food. They're supposed to care for us when we're hurting. It's a biblical image of a certain kind of leader in the church, and it's a good one. And by the way, we have some great pastors. I mean, Koffo's a great pastor, isn't he? I see, yeah. Koffo, Yetunde, Judith, they all do a great job. Koffo, I see him spending hours in his office talking to people, caring for people, looking after people. And he challenges them. But did you know that the New Testament only mentions the formal role of a pastor once? And the act of pastoring, mainly in relation to elders and overseers, just a handful of times. It talks about apostles whose task it was to keep the church focused on its mission and purpose, far more than it talks about pastors. Depending on your translation, it's about 80 times. 80 times about apostles, give or take, compared to once about the pastor. Koffo wants less work. In 1 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about the priority of apostolic ministry. He talks about it like this in 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 28. 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 28 says this: and God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second, prophets, third, teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kind of tongues. And so he goes on. Now, I don't think Paul was an apostle, so I suppose it's possible that Paul was just like, hey, I'm an apostle and I want to be in charge around here. I don't think that's what was going on there. I don't think that Scripture is trying to say that you should treat some people as megastars and elevate them above everyone else. I think what Paul was trying to help the church to realize here is you need to understand what the priority is. You need to understand what's important. You see, our gospel, we believe, is that we had forfeited our right to be part of God's plan and purpose. He created us to be his children and to be part of what he wanted to do in our world. And that was lost to us when either deliberately or through ignorance or just not being bothered, whatever the reason, we were going our own way and we were doing our own thing and we weren't giving our attention to our relationship with God as our Father. And so we weren't part of his plan and his purpose. That was lost to us. But our gospel, our good news that we want to share with people is that actually he's made a way for us to be restored into relationship with himself. That we're not outside of that plan and purpose anymore. We are back part of the family business. We're back part of God's family and what he is all about. That's the wonder of the gospel that we've believed. Jesus didn't say, follow me and I will give you everything you want, organize everything around your needs, and do everything I can to make your life comfortable. Who's ever read that in their Bible? Show me the verse. I'll start preaching on it. No, Jesus said to those first fishermen that he called, follow me and I will send you out. Matthew 4:19. Follow me and I will send you out to fish for people. I'll help you to make your lives all about this wonderful, amazing plan and purpose that God has to draw more and more people back into relationship with himself, to be part of this amazing kingdom of love, justice, righteousness, peace, joy, and so on. That's the basic call of God upon all of our lives. Jesus says, follow me, and I will include you in my dream of bringing more and more people into relationship with my Father. It is all about the gospel. It is all about the gospel. And if we got a bit confused for a moment and we thought it was about us achieving our career goals or having the life of comfort that we long for, that we crave, if we thought it was about, God loves you. And he wants you to know a life that is fulfilled and full of purpose. And yes, as part of that, he will give different people different careers. He'll make them successful in different ways. But when we make that the goal, we've missed the point. The point is the gospel, the good news that your neighbors, your friends, the people you work with, the people you study alongside, God longs for them. God longs for them to know the joy of a relationship with himself. Jesus says, follow me and I'll include you in that dream of bringing more and more people into relationship with myself. So when we look for a church community that we can be a part of, we need to look for a community that can help us in that mission. We need to look for a community that is going to keep pushing us to think about how can I share the gospel with my neighbors and my friends and the people that I work with. If my church community doesn't challenge me in that way, if it doesn't push me in that way, if I've turned into this place of seeing the church community is to just provide something for me to keep me going on a weekly basis, if I'm not seeing it as something that challenges me, that points me outward and directs me towards the lost, then either I'm not in the right church for me, or there's something wrong with the church and we need to change. If we're not seeing new people become Christians amongst us, either because we're bringing our friends or because we're reaching out to the local community, if that's not happening amongst us, then something is wrong. And it's hard to say that because look, we're really full today. And it would be really easy for me as a leader to feel relieved and happy and say, well, yep, we're full, it's great. But if we're not seeing people come to faith in Jesus, if we're not seeing people becoming Christians and being added into his kingdom, then we've still got to challenge ourselves that something needs to happen. We all need to be part of a community that is going to stretch us and challenge us and equip us in playing our part in embodying the gospel. So I'm not going to ask you to do something particular as a response to this message. I'm not going to ask you to sign up to a course or go out on an outreach event or anything like that. What I really hope we will all do is think and reflect. I don't think we have been focused enough as a church community on helping lost people to find Jesus. And I know that as leaders, we have to take some responsibility for that. As one of the senior leaders, I have to take some responsibility for that. But I'm wondering if you will think about that too. I'm wondering if you will reflect on that too. What do you want from us as a church? What do you want from us as a church? What do you want us to help you to do? Because that'll affect the feedback you give us, won't it? That'll affect what you tell us we're doing well, and it'll affect what you tell us we need to do better in. What will you encourage us to help you to do? And what will you help us to help each other to do as a church community? We've got to make it all about the gospel. We've got to make it all about the gospel. I love this church community. I mean, I have to really. I've given my whole adult life to this church community. And I'm 50 this year, so that's quite a while. Honestly, for the last 25 years I've worked here, I love this church community. I long with all my heart for us to win the lost, for us to be a beacon of hope for broken, hurting people, for people who are lost, for people who need Jesus. I long for us to reach your family, your friends, your community, your neighborhood. So let's ask ourselves, there's no one quick fix, but let's ask ourselves and keep asking ourselves the question, what do we expect from church? What do we want from church? What do we want to go after? And will we make this church community all about the gospel? Amen.